Welcome back to River Cottage. It's always brilliant to have the ZOE team here, and I'm delighted to be knocking out another batch of seasonal recipes that pack in the plants to help keep you well through the chilly months ahead, and well beyond too. First up, I'm going to be putting together a fabulous roasting tray of the finest veg of the season, aromatized with some lovely herbs and a little bit of citrus, and I'm going to be serving that with a delicious creamy hummus and a sprinkling of dukkah, that's toasted spiced seeds, a great way to finish any veg dish. The colourful pile that I've got in front of me is 3 different roots, 3 different brassicas, a couple of alliums, some lovely herbs, and the secret sauce, the citrus. Now, I haven't counted yet, but I reckon that's double figures of plants going in the tray. And for a cheeky little gut-friendly pud, I'm going to be sharing my kefir with you, served up with a tangy compote of dried fruits and some nuts. And I'm actually going to show you how to make your own kefir using live kefir grains. You won't believe how easy it is, and it'll give you a ready supply every day of the week. Now, back to the roasted veg. These chunky roots are going to take a little bit longer than the brassicas, so I'm going to start with them, kicking off with the good old carrot. I don't always peel my carrots, but in the winter when they've been stored and the skin's just a little bit coarse, I do whip it off with a very fine peeler. Turn it, turn it, turn it, turn it. And then you get these pointy little sharp edges, which is really good for caramelizing in the oven. Much the same story with the parsnips. I love the tapering point on a parsnip because it gives you lots of different textures when they roast. You get a really chewy, almost burnt tip, and then they get a bit more tender as you go up the parsnip. My final root is actually a favourite of mine, doesn't get nearly enough attention. It's really inexpensive. It's a swede. Again, slightly random shapes. It's not just the roots that are going in from the off. I'm going to put these onions in too because I want them to cook long and slow and get really nice and caramelised. These sort of medium small red onions can go into quarters or halves, but I keep them joined at the base so they don't break up too much while they're roasting. So it's easiest to cut it lengthways, and lengthways into a quarter, and then just take off the papery skin to get to the good stuff. You can see these little yellow sprouts in the middle of the onion, reminding us that actually spring isn't very far away. And right up to this moment, these onions have the potential to grow again. They're living foods. That's one of the reasons they're so packed with good things, alive until the moment we cook them. Look at that. That's a nice tray of roots and onions, not too crowded, still a little space around them, and that'll leave room for the brassicas when they go in later. And look at these lovely colours, even before we've added the greens. And when I see a tray of beautiful, colourful veg like this, I'm always thinking that colour just means goodness. You know, at some level it tells you that each of those veg have got different things going on, different nutrients. I can't tell you what they all are. Probably some of my friends at ZOE can. Why not drop them a line and see if they know? For me, it just means lots of colour, lots of goodness. At this point, just the simplest of seasonings for the roots and onions, salt, pepper, and a good dash of oil. You can use whatever cooking oil you have when you're roasting veg, but I do like to use good quality, ideally unrefined oils. This is British hemp oil, which is really good on omega-3s and excellent for roasting. And this is some lovely organic olive oil. So I'm going to use them both. Now I'm going to give it the chefy shuffle just to make sure everything is nicely coated. And that goes into a hot oven, about 190 degrees centigrade. I'm just giving the Brussels sprouts a little trim, maybe taking off 1 or 2 of the outer leaves to make sure they're nice and clean. But when you're roasting them, the outer leaves are going to get lightly charred anyway, so they're quite forgiving. And now that I've turned my attention to the brassicas, I'm thinking of a nutrient that I've been finding out a little about. It's called sulforaphane. It's brilliant for your gut biome and helpful in preventing all sorts of common diseases. And almost all the brassicas, sprouts, cabbages, broccoli, are rich in sulforaphane. Sprouts all ready to go. This lovely freshly picked purple sprouting broccoli hardly needs any prep or trimming. I can see it's in great nick. And the leaves are delicious too, of course. I'm just cracking open a whole bulb of garlic, and all these whole cloves are going to go in. I'm not going to peel the last of the papery skin off because they're quite small cloves and it'll help protect them from the heat. But when they're roasted, I'll be able to squeeze out all that gooey garlic flesh. And then the last thing that needs prepping is this beautiful hispi cabbage. And the way to roast this is to keep it in wedges. So you're using the base here to hold the wedges together. So I'm going to cut it straight down from the base to the point. Probably half a cabbage is going to do me. Look at that. Just going to give everything a nice turn. And I can see some lovely crispy corners and golden edges already. Time to get the brassicas in any moment, but first, for extra aromatics, a few bay leaves and some rosemary. Now, it's very rare that I add ingredients to a dish that won't actually get eaten, but munching on a bay leaf isn't a load of fun. But they will impart their incredibly aromatic essential oils to the veg. And the same goes for this rosemary, although I don't mind nibbling a few rosemary needles when I'm eating the roots. So the question I have about the bay leaves is, given that we're not going to actually consume them, do they count as a plant? The sprouts are pretty hardy, so I'm going to tumble them in and toss them through the roots. Same goes for the purple sprouting. Another little trickle of my two oils. Tossing everything together. Now, if it was colourful before, look at it now, with the greens getting in on the act. And you just know you're adding so much goodness at this point too. Last of the brassicas, because they're a little more delicate, I'm going to arrange the hispi wedges over the top. Just salt and pepper again. Never too much, but a little always helps everything taste great. One of each. And finally, a little quirky finish. You may have been wondering what this orange is doing. A bright fruit lurking among the veg. I'm going to cut it into chunks and spread it through the dish. It's going to create an amazing final flavour. Lovely citrusy aromatics and a hint of sweetness. And that's going back in the oven. Now I'm going to make the hummus, and it's probably going to be a little bit different from any hummus you've made before. For starters, I'm doubling up all the ingredients to double the amount of plants. So instead of just chickpeas, I'm using two different types of pulse, chickpeas and these lovely dark peas called carlin peas. These are actually a British grown pea, but you could use any other pulse. You could use chickpeas and kidney beans, chickpeas and butter beans, works really well. I'm also doubling up the traditional tahini by adding some almond butter as well. And I'm going to be using lemon juice and some orange juice. And not one, but two types of oil. Let's get going. Time to add the carlin peas. Of course, there is a good reason people invented powered kitchen appliances to save the labour of this kind of work. Just bashing these two pulses together into this paste, you know you're making something really healthy. So much fibre, so much goodness. Beans and peas and other pulses, they really are the ingredients that we don't get enough of. And a nice rough hummus like this is a brilliant way to enjoy them. And now even more goodness and even more flavour. The traditional tahini, I'm putting a couple of generous teaspoons in there, but not too much. It's a really strong flavour. And that's one of the reasons I turned to a nut butter to add yet another plant, but a really healthy nut. This time I've gone for almond butter, but you could use a peanut butter or a cashew butter. And the sticky spreads, the tahini and the peanut butter, they're what's going to bring this hummus together. Pulses like these are, of course, so good for us. They're full of protein and fibre, and it's fibre from as many different plants as possible that really helps nurture our gut biome and boost our immunity. So they're doing great work for us. And now I'm going to make them really delicious with some extra flavours, starting with just a slither of garlic. This garlic is raw, so it's a lot harsher than the mellow roasted garlic in with the veg, and I only need a tiny bit of it. And the best way to get it in there is to mash it with a little sprinkling of coarse salt. I'm just making a little paste of salt and garlic, so that will distribute very nicely through the hummus. Crushing raw garlic like this actually breaks down the cell walls, and that releases one of garlic's great aromatic qualities, allicin, which is also very good for us. In it goes, and that nice creamy paste will quickly distribute its way around the hummus. Just one little twist. You're just very finely grating the outer zest. You don't want to get too busy with that white pith because it can be bitter. And that is a lovely load of lemon zest. But I'm not going to stop there with the citrus. I've got an unwaxed orange here. It's always better to use unwaxed fruit when you're zesting. That was an unwaxed lemon. The thing about this hummus is I'm taking it in the direction of being quite loose, because it's going to be almost sort of pourable as a dressing for my roast veg rather than scoopable, which is what you might think the normal texture of a hummus is. And of course the juice is going in too, both the lemon and the orange. That's going to add some sharpness and also a nice dose of vitamin C. That's going to help with our winter wellness, keep those colds away. So let's start with half a lemon and half an orange. I just need to taste those seasonings. Where are we at with that citrus? Oh my gosh, that is really good. Those pulses are great. I'm tasting the tahini and the almonds, and that was a crunchy almond butter, by the way, so I've got even more texture there, which is brilliant. This is also going to start to loosen the hummus. One perfectly acceptable way to make it looser is just to add a little bit of water. There's so much flavour here anyway that you're hardly going to dilute it. What I've got here is some of the water saved from the chickpea jar, so that's got some good nutrition in it as well. Worth hanging on to that for this little exercise in loosening the hummus. Now we're getting there. It's beautifully creamy, but also wonderfully textured. Just a final taste for the seasonings, and I'm not double dipping my tasting spoon. This is a new one. Oh, that's gorgeous. That citrus is right there now. The nutty crunch of the little bits of almond. It's really quite different from a regular hummus, and it's great. It's going to be brilliant with the roasted veg. But of course I've made quite a bit more than I need to serve with the veg, and I always do that when I make a hummus. It's such a great snack. ZOE's done some really interesting research on snacking, which tells us that around 25% of all our energy comes from snacks, and 75% of those snacks are from ultra-processed foods. So just by changing the way you snack and getting into things like hummus and healthier snacks, that can be really transformative for your health. Dukkah is a brilliantly useful combination of toasted nuts, seeds and spices. The biggest things go in first. In this case it's the hazelnuts. Now a sprinkling of pumpkin seeds. Just waiting to hear a few of those crackle and pop. Got to give it another little shake to make sure nothing burns. Time to sprinkle in the sunflower seeds and also the spices. Whole coriander seeds, a few fennel seeds and cumin seeds. But be careful now not to over toast it. Everything's crackling very nicely. It's not enough to just take the pan off the heat because it'll go on cooking. So I have to tip it straight into a bowl to cool. It's a great sprinkle to finish all kinds of dishes, and it's brilliant with my roast veg and hummus. Now everything gets a good bashing, a little bit at a time so that it doesn't get too explosive, but as it goes, a pinch of salt, a twist of pepper, wonderful toasted aromatic spicy notes coming from bashing up the seeds and spices together. Another little pinch of salt in this one, I think. I'm going to give them a bit more of a grinding just to really release those flavours. Fantastic smells now. And there we have it, a lovely crumbly texture and incredible nutty spicy flavours. The spices in this dukkah smell just fantastic, and you know it's going to be a great final sprinkling on the dish. Those tiny spice seeds full of those incredible aromatics often have unique phytonutrients that you don't find in other plants. So it's worth getting them into your diet, and it's definitely worth counting them in your 30 plants a week. You can hear that sizzle, and you can see that beautiful caramelization. That is just perfect. Right, It's time to plate up this lovely combination of great flavours and health boosting plants. Let's start with a big swirl of our luscious creamy hummus. I'm going to put it right over the base of the plate. I don't want to overload it. I think I've got a nice pair of plates to do here. I want to make sure everyone's got a bit of that orange to play with. A few more little dabs of the hummus here and there. Now another layer of crunch and aromatics from this gorgeous dukkah, making sure it particularly hits where the hummus is because that's where it's going to stick. It's punchy stuff, this dukkah. You don't need a lot of it. Finally, my chive tips, a little sign of spring to come. Now, you know what? I've been totting up the plants. I might not have got this exactly right. I reckon we've got 12 in the roasting tray. That's without counting the controversial bay and rosemary. We've got 7 in the hummus and 6 in the dukkah. I'm only counting the black pepper once, by the way. Spices count. Totting those up, that's 25 plants, well on our way to 30 with a single plate of gorgeous plant-packed food. This is such a lovely plate. I mean, there's just so much going on. You know that every mouthful is going to be different, every mouthful is going to be delicious, and every mouthful is going to be absolutely packed full of plant goodness. Oh yeah, it's such a great dish. You've just got to go and try it. Well, we've already packed in almost 30 plants with my roast veg, creamy, crunchy hummus and spicy dukkah. But the idea of a little sweet something at the end of a hearty meal is a hard one to resist. That little sweet thing doesn't have to be unhealthy. In fact, it can be seriously good for your gut and it can pack in a few more plants along the way. So I'm going to show you something that I sometimes do at the end of a meal, sometimes have for breakfast, that's based around this really beautiful dairy product called kefir. This is cultured milk brimming with live beneficial bacteria. It's a little bit like yogurt, but it's looser. It's got even more strains of bacteria in it, and it's got more of a tang. It's also got a refreshing acidity that I really like, that's excellent at the end of a meal. I love to enjoy it with a compote of dried fruits soaked for a few days in kombucha and some nuts soaked overnight. Before I show you how I put that together, I'm going to run through my kefir routine. This is what I do every 2 or 3 days to draw down the kefir that's ready to eat and start the next batch going. The last time I picked this up was a couple of days ago, so what's in here is deliciously fresh kefir ready to be harvested. And here's how I do it. The first thing I'm going to do is give it a stir with a clean wooden spoon. It's traditional not to use metallic implements when you're handling fermented things because there can be a little bit of reaction. Certainly you don't want to store anything fermented in metal. You can see it's lovely and creamy and a little bit grainy. And those grains are the secret of kefir's everlasting life. Now that I've stirred it, just to blend it together, you can see a few little lumps and bumps coming out through the kefir. Those are the clusters of grains, the kefir grains that actually have the live bacteria in them that, as long as you keep feeding them, go on culturing the milk and making the kefir. And just stir gently, pushing the rest of the kefir through the sieve until all that's left in the sieve are these gloopy clusters of grains. Once every 3 harvests or so, I'll take this sieve of grains to the sink and I'll rinse them out with fresh cold water. And that sort of rejuvenates them. It makes them hungry for more milk to feed them. It's a really good way of keeping them really lively and effective. I'm going to start the next batch going by returning these granules to my jar, just tipping them in. A pint of fresh whole milk, that's my preference. You can use semi-skim, but it does go better with whole milk. I'm pouring all of that over the grains into my jar. This rubber seal around my jar, I put that on if I'm moving the kefir around, but actually, while it's doing its thing, it wants to be able to breathe. So I'm just taking that off, and that now just stays at room temperature in my kitchen for another couple of days. 3 is also fine, before the next harvest, when it will yield some lovely, thick, delicious kefir. The longer you leave it, the tangier it gets. And some people like a 5-day or week-old kefir, which is really quite strong and acidic. I'm a kind of 2 or 3 day person myself. The thing is, just keep an eye on it. If it's been at room temperature for 24 hours or more, it will be kefir. The strength and thickness will vary slightly. You can always dip a clean spoon in and have a little taste. In this jar is a compote of dried fruits that have been soaking in my homemade kombucha for 4 days now. That's all that's in there. There's no added sugar. All the sweetness in that liquor comes from the fruits themselves. To prepare it to eat with my kefir, I like to pull out a few choice morsels and chop them up. This is just going to make them a little bit easier to eat. These are some dried apple rings from my own orchard, which I made in my dehydrator, just chopping them into little pieces. A dried unsulfured apricot, along with those gorgeous dried fruits. Some nuts. Hazelnuts and almonds that I've soaked overnight in fresh water. This really plumps them up, as many of you will know. It's sometimes called activating the nuts. It makes them more digestible, and it actually makes them more delicious. They become tender and creamy rather than gritty and crunchy. You can see it's got a nice creamy texture. And the rest of this is going in my kefir bottle, which is lovely and clean. It'll go straight in the fridge. And by the way, if you're wondering why the word kefir is splurged so emphatically on this milk bottle, it's because it has been known for certain members of my family to mistake this for the milk and put it in their tea and coffee. They don't like it, and it's a waste of very good kefir. Hence, kefir! That's what it says on the bottle. That's my little routine. This gorgeous kefir goes in the fridge for me to enjoy over the next couple of days. This is going to do its thing and it'll be ready in 2 or 3 days. Meanwhile, I'm going to enjoy a little treat. The final trickle of the juice from my compote. Here we go. A lovely way to finish my plant-packed feast and a real treat for my gut microbiome. And I really hope you'll have a crack at all these recipes at home. Just check out the information below. Just before I tuck into this, it's worth saying that if it doesn't feel practical for you to make your own kefir at home, then of course you can buy really good live kefir in the shops. Obviously I would say this, but this one happens to be one of my favourites. I really hope you'll try out all these recipes at home and stay tuned for the next batch of delicious seasonal healthy delights. For me, being healthy isn't about fad diets or pumping iron down at the gym. It's about enjoying life, eating good food, being out in nature, but it is definitely about looking after your gut health too.